Coffee was still hot when she told me she wanted a divorce. I remember that detail because I had just poured it. Full cup, steam rising. I set it on the counter, looked at her, and she was already looking at her phone. 31 years. That's how long we had been married. She said it the way someone reads off a grocery list. Calm, practiced. Like she had rehearsed it in the car on the way home and was relieved to finally get the words out. I want a divorce, Howard. I think we both know this hasn't been working. I didn't say anything. I picked up my coffee. She seemed almost annoyed that I didn't react. My name is Howard. I'm 63 years old. I spent 34 years as a forensic accountant. The last 18 of those as a senior investigator for a federal contractor that worked closely with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I have reviewed thousands of financial records. I have testified in federal court. I have helped put people in prison for things they thought were invisible on paper. My wife knew all of this. That's the part that still gets me, even now. She knew exactly what I did for a living, and she still thought I wouldn't notice. Let me back up. Her name is Lorraine. She is 57 years old. She is tall and sharp-featured, and she has always been the kind of person who makes a room feel smaller when she walks in. Not because she's unpleasant, but because she fills it. She was a regional sales director for a medical device company when we met. By the time things fell apart, she was a senior vice president of business development. That promotion happened fast, faster than it should have. 3 years. She went from director to VP in 3 years, which in her industry is not unheard of, but it's also not nothing. I congratulated her. I took her to dinner. I bought her the pearl earrings she had been looking at for months. I didn't ask questions. That was my first mistake, I suppose. Not the asking, but the not asking. I was busy. I had my own cases. I trusted her. You trust the person you've been sleeping next to for 30 years. That's not naive. That's just how it works. But a few months after that dinner, something started to bother me. Nothing I could name at first, just a frequency, a low hum in the background of our life that wasn't there before. She was at the office later. She was quieter at home. She laughed differently at her phone, shorter, quicker, and the screen flipped face down. I noticed. I didn't say anything, but I noticed. The thing about spending your career looking at financial crime is that you develop a particular kind of patience. You learn to watch before you move. You learn that the instinct to confront is almost always wrong. It tips off the subject. It destroys evidence. It closes doors before you even find out where they lead. So I watched. I'm not proud of everything I did in those months, but I'm not ashamed of it either. I started with the household accounts. We had always kept shared checking and savings for bills and joint expenses, and individual accounts for our personal spending, a structure we had set up early in the marriage to avoid the kind of nickel and diming that ruins relationships. Her personal account was her own. I had no access. I had no right to access it. But I did have access to our joint accounts, and what I saw there told me enough. She had started, gradually, to reduce her deposits into our shared account. Small amounts. The kind of reduction you'd attribute to a cost of living adjustment, a change in paycheck timing. Nothing alarming. But I have spent a career looking at exactly this pattern. The slow redirection of funds before a larger move. It's what embezzlers do in the early stages. It's what people do when they're building a separate financial life. I said nothing. I pulled our mortgage statements. Current. I pulled the property tax records for our house. Current. I pulled the records on a vacation property in the Smoky Mountains, a small cabin we had bought together 12 years ago, titled in both our names. The cabin records were fine, but I noticed looking at the county assessor's website that there had been a title inquiry on the property 3 months earlier. Not a transfer, just an inquiry. I wrote it down and went to bed. I called my youngest daughter on a Tuesday afternoon when I knew she was on her lunch break. Her name is Patricia. She's 34, works in HR for a logistics company in Nashville, and she has her mother's cheekbones and my stubbornness, which I've always considered a good combination. I didn't tell her what I suspected. I just asked if she had noticed anything different about her mother lately. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dad, I didn't want to say anything." That was enough. She told me that her mother had mentioned once, during a phone call in February, that she had been thinking about her next chapter. that she'd been talking to someone Patricia didn't recognize, that at Christmas she had been distracted in a way that went beyond the usual holiday stress. I thanked her. I told her I loved her. I hung up and sat in my truck in the parking lot of the grocery store for 20 minutes. Then I called my attorney. His name is Gerald Fitch. He's been my attorney for 16 years. He's 71 years old, semi-retired, and he has forgotten more about family law and asset protection in this state than most active practitioners will ever know. I chose him because he is precise, patient, and entirely unimpressed by theatrics. He listened to everything I had to say without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Have you touched anything? Changed anything? Moved any money?" I said no. He said, "Good. Don't. Come see me Thursday." Over the next several weeks, Gerald helped me do several things. First, we had an independent appraisal done on the cabin, not because I planned to sell it, but because I wanted a documented market value on record before anything else happened to it. The appraiser found it in good condition, valued at $287,000. That number went into a file. Second, Gerald connected me with a private investigator he had used before, a woman named Sandra, who had spent 20 years in law enforcement before going private. I didn't enjoy this part. I want to be honest about that. Hiring someone to follow your wife is a particular kind of humiliation. You sit across the desk from a stranger and describe your marriage like it's a case, and you watch them write things down without reacting, and you think, how did I get here? I gave Sandra the name of my wife's supervisor. His name, I'll just say, was someone who had been with the company 12 years, was recently divorced, and drove a car that cost more than most people make in a year. Sandra did her job. I won't go into detail. The detail isn't the point. What she found confirmed what I already suspected about the personal relationship. But she found something else too, something I hadn't anticipated. She found a real estate agent. Lorraine had met 3 times with the residential real estate agent in a town about 40 minutes north of where we live. Not to buy, to sell. And the property she had been discussing, informally according to the agent's calendar notes, which Sandra obtained through legitimate means I still don't fully understand, was described in her notes as cabin property, joint titled. Client to clarify ownership situation. Client to clarify ownership situation. I read that phrase 4 times, then I went back to the county records and looked again at that title inquiry from 3 months earlier. It had come from a title company, the same title company this real estate agent used routinely. I called Gerald. He said, "She can't sell it without your signature." I said, "I know." He said, "She may not know that." I said, "Oh, she may be planning to find a way around it." Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How are you doing, Howard?" I told him I was fine. He said, "I'll take your word for it. Come in Monday." I want to say something here about the nights. The days were manageable. The days I had things to do, records to review, calls to make, quiet errands that were not actually errands. The days I could fill. The nights were different. I would lie in bed next to a woman I had known for 31 years and think about the cabin. I thought about the summer we bought it, how we had driven out on a Saturday in late October, and the leaves were at peak color, and she had stood on the back porch and said, "Howard, I want this one," with a certainty I had never heard about anything else. I thought about the Christmas mornings we had spent there with the kids when they were small. The leaky faucet I had fixed 3 times and finally paid someone to fix correctly. I thought about all the ways a life accumulates into something. All the small repairs and long drive and ordinary evenings that you don't even know you're building while you're building them. And I thought about a title inquiry, and the real estate agent's calendar notes, and the way she had started putting her phone face down. I didn't sleep much. In March, Gerald brought in a CPA who specialized in matrimonial finance. Her name was Helen, and she was thorough in a way that was almost soothing, the kind of professional who explains complicated things in plain language and doesn't make you feel foolish for not already knowing them. Helen reviewed what I had shared about our joint accounts, our retirement assets, the property holdings. She identified something I had suspected but hadn't confirmed. Over the preceding 14 months, the total deposits into our joint account from Lorraine's paycheck had decreased by approximately $2,200 per month. Over 14 months, that was about $30,100 that should have gone into our shared account and had gone somewhere else instead. Helen said, This is a documented pattern of financial separation in anticipation of divorce. In this state, depending on how long the marriage was and how assets are classified, this could constitute dissipation of marital assets. I asked her what that meant practically. She said it meant the court could factor it into the division of property. It meant the money wasn't just gone, it was documented and it had a name. I wrote that down. She asked for the divorce on a Thursday evening in April. I had just poured my coffee. She had just come in from work. She was wearing a blouse I hadn't seen before. I want a divorce, Howard. I think we both know this hasn't been working. I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about what Gerald had told me the previous Friday. I thought about what Helen had calculated. I thought about Sandra's report, sitting in a manila folder in the locked drawer of my desk. I said, okay. She blinked. I think she expected something different. That's it, she said. That's your response? We can talk about the details when you're ready, I said. I'll have Gerald reach out to your attorney. She stared at me. Then she picked up her phone and walked upstairs. I stood in the kitchen and drank my coffee. It had gone a little cold. I drank it anyway. The next 6 weeks were procedural. Her attorney contacted Gerald. Documents were exchanged. Temporary financial orders were put in place, which meant neither of us could make significant asset transfers during the proceedings. A standard protection, but one that Gerald had been anticipating and was prepared for. It also meant the cabin was frozen. She hadn't moved on the cabin was frozen. She hadn't moved on the cabin yet. I think she had been waiting for the right moment. The temporary order closed that window before she found it. Gerald told me when I asked that this outcome was not accidental. He had advised me to file a response the moment her attorney made contact, which triggered the automatic temporary restraining order on marital assets. Fast, clean, and entirely by the book. That's why we prepared, he said. I should tell you about my son. His name is Russell. He's 31, works in construction management in Chattanooga, and he is, without question, the most stubborn person I've ever encountered in my life. Which, given what I've told you about Patricia, is saying something. He called me 2 days after Lorraine served me with the formal petition. He said, Dad, are you okay? I said, I'm getting there. He said, do you need me to come up? I said, do you need me to come up? I said, not yet, but stay close. He said, I'm coming up Sunday for dinner whether you need me or not. He did. He brought his girlfriend and a pan of lasagna, and we sat at the kitchen table until past 11, talking about everything except the divorce, which was exactly what I needed. I've never told him that, but I'm telling it now. The mediation session was scheduled for a Wednesday in June. Lorraine arrived with her attorney, a man I'll describe as polished and confident in the particular way of someone who has won enough cases to stop worrying about the ones in front of him. He shook my hand. He called me by my first name without asking. Lorraine sat across the table from me for the first time in weeks. She looked good, composed. She was wearing the pearl earrings I had given her. I don't know why she wore those. Maybe she didn't think about it. Maybe she didn't think about it. Maybe she did. I didn't look at them for long. Her attorney opened by describing their position on the assets, a proposed split that was framed generously but was, in fact, structured to give her the cabin outright as part of her share, offset against my retention of a larger portion of the retirement accounts. I watched Gerald's face while he listened. He was expressionless. When her attorney finished, Gerald said pleasantly, before we discuss the proposed asset division, I'd like to introduce some documentation into the record. He placed 3 folders on the table. The first was Helen's report, 14 months of joint account activity, documented shortfall, the $30,800 calculation with sourcing. The second was the independent property appraisal of the cabin. The third was Sandra's summary report, redacted to the relevant portions, which included documentation of the meetings with the real estate agent, the title inquiry, and the calendar notes with the phrase client to clarify ownership situation. Lorraine's attorney stopped looking polished. Lorraine stopped looking composed. She looked at the folders and then she looked at me, and for the first time in the entire process, she looked uncertain. I didn't look away. Mediation lasted 2 sessions. The second session was shorter than the first. By the end of it, the proposed split had changed significantly. The cabin remained a joint marital asset subject to equitable division. The documented $30,800 in redirected deposits was treated, for the purposes of settlement, as an advance against her share, meaning it came directly off her portion of the division. Her attorney argued this framing. Gerald was patient and precise and unmoved. The retirement accounts were split according to the standard formula for a 31-year marriage in our state. She did not get the cabin outright. We agreed to sell it, which was not what I wanted. I had spent 12 years fixing that faucet, but the equity was split fairly, and fairly was enough. There was one more thing. During the discovery process, Gerald's paralegal had flagged something in the financial documentation that I had not initially flagged myself, which, given my background, gave me a complicated feeling I'm still not entirely sure how to describe. Over the preceding 2 years, there were a series of expense reimbursements from Lorraine's company, legitimate in format, but with anomalies that suggested the underlying expenses may not have been. The amounts were not enormous. The pattern, however, was recognizable. Gerald conferred with a colleague who had experience in corporate compliance matters. That colleague made a quiet referral. I was not involved in what happened next. I want to be clear about that. I did not make a report. I did not push for an investigation. I passed the information to people who were qualified to evaluate it, and then I stepped back. What I know is that approximately 4 months after our divorce was finalized, Lorraine's company conducted an internal audit. I don't know the full outcome. Her LinkedIn profile no longer shows an employer. I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected to feel when Patricia told me. I felt tired, mostly, and a little sad. Not for her, or not only for her, for the 31 years, I think. For the version of the story I had believed for a long time. The divorce was finalized in September. I drove up to the cabin one last time in October before the closing. The leaves were pea color, same as they always are that time of year in the mountains. I stood on the back porch and looked at the tree line and thought about the day we bought the place. I thought about what she had said. I want this one. I thought about how certain she had sounded, how I had believed her. I locked the door for the last time. I put the key in my jacket pocket. I drove home. Russell and Patricia come for dinner most Sundays now. Patricia is seeing someone new, a quiet, thoughtful man who asks good questions and actually listens to the answers. Russell's girlfriend has started calling me Howard instead of Sir, which I consider progress. I retired in February. Not because I had to, but because I had been meaning to for 2 years, and I kept finding reasons to wait, and I ran out of reasons. I have a small vegetable garden now. Tomatoes, peppers, a row of green beans that have outperformed every expectation I had for them. I cook most evenings. I sleep better than I have in years. Last week, Gerald called to check in. He does that occasionally, even with former clients. He asked how I was doing. I told him the truth. I said better than I thought I would be. He said, they usually are. I think about that sometimes. What it means to prepare for something you hoped you'd never need. To build something careful and steady in the dark, and then to carry it into the light and to find out, finally, after all of it, that the work was worth doing. She thought she was leaving a man who wouldn't notice. She had 31 years of evidence to the contrary. She just never looked at it. I've been thinking lately about what it actually cost to stay quiet, not the emotional cost. I knew that bill was coming and I paid it night after sleepless night. I mean the other kind. The cost of watching something fall apart and choosing, deliberately, not to reach out and grab it before you understand what you're actually holding. Most people, when they feel the ground shift, react. They confront. They accuse. They demand answers before they've even figured out the right questions. I understand that impulse. I felt it too. Felt it every time she put her phone face down, every time I noticed another month where the deposit into our joint account was a little short. There's a version of this story where I said something in those early weeks and watched everything I had carefully built get dismantled in an argument before I had a single document to show for 31 years. I didn't do that, not because I'm especially patient by nature. I'm not. I'm stubborn and thorough, and I have a professional habit of not moving until I know what I'm moving toward. That training saved me. Not luck, not timing. The simple discipline of preparing before acting. What happened to Lorraine wasn't something I did to her. I want to be clear about that because I've thought about it enough to be sure. What happened to her was the accumulated weight of her own choices, arriving all at once in a room she thought she had already won. The $30,800 in redirected deposits, she moved that money. The title inquiry on the cabin, she made that call. The meetings with the real estate agent, the calendar note about clarifying ownership, all of it was hers. I just made sure there was someone in that room who had read every page. That's the part people sometimes miss when they hear a story like this. They focus on the outcome and assume the person who came out ahead was cleverer or luckier or had resources the other person didn't. Sometimes that's true, but more often the outcome is just a reflection of the preparation. Gerald didn't win that mediation with a speech. He won it with 3 folders that took months to build. I think about Russell driving up on a Sunday with lasagna without being asked. I think about Patricia telling me carefully that she didn't want to say anything and then saying it anyway because she loved me more than she feared the conversation. Those things mattered as much as any document. You don't get through something like this on strategy alone. You get through it because you built something real over years with people who show up when showing up is inconvenient. The cabin sold in November. I signed the papers on a Tuesday morning and drove home. I made eggs and watched the light come through the kitchen window, the same window where she told me she wanted a divorce. The house felt different by then, quieter in a way I had gotten used to. The vegetable garden did well this year, the tomatoes especially. I don't know why that feels worth mentioning, but it does. You get to choose every day whether your actions are building something or dismantling it. Lorraine made her choices over 14 months and thought no one was keeping track. I made mine over the same period and made sure every one of them was documented, defensible, and done with my full name attached. That's the only lesson I know how to offer. Live like the record matters, because eventually, in one room or another, it will be read aloud.